So let's begin the conversation with you, Professor Enin. And we laid the foundation about the issues that the former president spoke about. But what would you say generally is the reason why the continent is where it is in terms of the disillusionment among young people? And of course, the Kenyan protests seem to have provided a certain premise to discuss this in detail.
Well, I think this has been waiting to happen for a very long time. The joy and optimism of the independence movement and the immediate independence movement has not translated into improved lives for most people on this continent. That is one. Two relates to the sheer demographics. So a tiny elite that benefited from good education took over the reins of power and basically decided to turn inwards using the public funds for their pecuniary needs, so family and friends. Third, and I always cite this example with the demographics, that if you look at Ghana's population around between 1951 and 1957, we were just a little, larger than the state of Denmark. Okay? We've moved from around 5 million in 1951, thereabouts, to almost 33 million now. Denmark has moved from around 3.84 million to just about 6 million. Okay, so the demographics alone, with Ghana's population having about 57–58% of all its population below the age of 25, meaning that we are almost in a cauldron with a lot of pressure, with very few tiny vents for that pressure to get out. The third or fourth most critical point that I think we need to look at is the disconnect between a gerontocratic political economic elite and this huge young bulge. So if you take the Kenyan case, there were no leaders, identifiable individuals or groups. These were people who are tech savvy, used social media to organize, and they used a language that once more showed the disconnect between what these young people wanted and how the political elite understood it. So the president and across this continent are very dismissive when people stand up for their rights. So Ruto said what? They were treacherous people, they were criminals. And the young people are saying that, look, we are not criminals. All that we are saying is that you are gambling with our future and we have a voice and we want to use that voice. I've just come from Mombasa and Nairobi, and the streets are quiet. But if you see the raw military accoutrements on the street, it looks like war. And you wonder to yourself, but who is the enemy here?
Meaning what?
How is the state perceiving, understanding, and interpreting this desire for inclusion in how people's futures are designed? So we need a new type of conversation. But these social movements demanding inclusion and a more transparent accountability for how the public purse is misused or used is going to rise. We cannot quell it.
Professor Bafo-Agyeman-Duah, if you take a look at us situating this conversation, then following up from what Professor Enin did say, then it means that we have a certain current style of leadership deficit. If you take a look at the initial leaders who gained independence from our colonialists and the current leaders that we have, what is the difference they have with the initial ones? And then how do they also sync in terms of their style that is breeding the current disenchantment we're facing in Ghana and the rest of the African continent?
Well, good question. And I think one of the core reasons for the protests in Kenya, as it could be in other African countries, is precisely the point made by Kwesi and yourself in terms of the style of leadership, the whole question of leadership in our various countries on the continent. You see, the Africans who took over from the colonial government simply inherited the structures of leadership that were bequeathed to them, and in fact added a lot more to what they bequeathed to them. And I think over the years, it has become very clear to all of us that leadership is the greatest deficit in governance in African countries because of the visibility of their style of leadership. Look, if a country is poor and everybody knows that there's economic crunch in a country, and they do not see this vast disparity between the governors and the governed, I'm sure they may blame the governors, but it won't be as severe as we experience in it. In other words, if the government continuously tells the people, we are poor, we're going to borrow money to do this, we are poor, we are going to do this, and at the same time, what they see does not reflect poverty in terms of those who rule us, then that continuously will breed this kind of discontent. Of course, I'm aware of the complications of governance, the fact that we have foreign domination in many areas, perhaps in all of our areas. I'm aware of the way the global economy treats the African countries. And I don't know if our leaders are aware of that because they are not taking measures to indicate that, in fact, perhaps it is global oppression that keeps us down, and therefore we are developing strategies to delimit that, if not completely cutting that off. And if you look at recent statements by these young military guys in the Sahel, it's becoming increasingly clear to me that they are taking a step that to be more conducive to changing our circumstance, unlike others who simply delight in a lifestyle that perpetuates the underdevelopment or the poverty of their people. I can go through, in fact, if you look at the issues that Ruto is dealing with and the recent statement that he made, clearly he's conceding to all the demands, almost all the demands of the young people, including closing down office of the first lady, office of the second lady, fully staffed with vehicles and everything. He's now collapsing 47 state agencies, streamlining them and reducing the 47 to about, say, 15. And this is happening almost everywhere. African leaders are quick to create institutions that do not produce, but that consume. Because if you create an institution and you have a CEO with 3, 4 deputies and a whole retinue of office staff and rental space and all, and almost invariably they rent their own buildings to these institutions to make money, the lifestyle is a major issue. Of course, in addition to their own ineptitudes and lack of understanding of the social dynamics created by their own recklessness. You see, so I think whilst we have to find a way to get our leaders to deal with the externalities of our circumstance, I think it's also important to look at constitutions, a pet subject of mine, even though some people who argue that it's not the constitution, it's the people that you put there. To some extent, that is true. But if the Constitution gives so much discretion to the executive to go and sleep an overnight, create institutions and staff it with family and friends, and they spend so much on them, that is a constitutional issue. The discretion that makes them do things that they ought not do, you see. So I think it's a broader issue that we are all struggling with, but there's something we can do about it. If those who want to lead our countries come with a mindset that is completely different from the mindset that has been prevailing since our post-independence era.
And Professor Ini, I remember I had an interaction in my early years within the Kufuor administration when we had a number of visits of various development economists and security professors coming to Africa. There's one who always had a certain printable impression on me, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And I'll just recall his visit to Kenya on a UNDP program the early part of this year. And he said the East African region was a bastion of growth. It promises a lot of development also for its youth, and that could have a reflection on Southern Africa, etc. If we have such people saying that there's so much promise, yet it looks like the leadership style in such countries like Kenya and Ghana, etc., don't seem to give promise to the youth, what could be the reason why? When they see light and we don't seem to feel that light in the leadership?
Well, let me start this way. You know, knowledge generation is not devoid of the impact of the person who is generating that knowledge. That knowledge generation is not neutral.
Meaning what?
Meaning that if you look at the way knowledge has been passed on to us, and I think Bafour made this point about global oppression and foreign dominance. We hardly ever have our own people with the requisite skill sets and experience being sent to us by the IMF to come and tell us how to move on. So Jeffrey comes and says, look, I see growth. But growth in what ways? For who? Okay, words have multiple meanings and they open avenues for multiple interpretations. So anyone who understands the Kenyan case and only sees growth as separated from the wider and larger social dynamics, then did not understand Kenya. Because what we are seeing right now has its genesis from, I think, the 2008 elections thereabout, where almost about 1,000 people were basically slaughtered. Okay? Now, the resolution of that crisis, and last week in Mombasa and Nairobi, we spent a lot of time talking about this. Those who were raped, those who were maimed, those who were killed, have not had any restitution, or at best very tiny. So for somebody to come and tell us that I see light, which may be true, you cannot create light, growth, opportunity when the basis for that growth is faulty. And I think all too often we like those who are experts for a totally different context coming to tell us in a totally different context also how to work. So when you generate knowledge in a Western economy in which the institutions work, and I think Bafour made a very good point about institutions, in which there are rules and regulations, in which there's discipline and order, in which the desire to get into public service is just that, to serve and not to loot. Then your understandings of the functionality of those institutions and how those countries work cannot be applied here, where here we get into politics, not for the sake of the public good. Okay, so you come from country X and you tell people of country Y, look, based on the parameters and variables that I am using from my education and experience, oh, Roland, you should be, as a big journalist, you should be a multimillionaire in the next 2 years. Now, that is bogus analysis and bogus knowledge. And I think as Africans, we should be able to be bold enough to call out those who come within our space without that cultural sensitivity and knowledge about cultural diversity and the way we do our things, superimposing different types of knowledge generation and conclusions on how we should move forward. Therein lies part of the challenges that we are facing. So Kenya's problems have been, the foundations have been laid for a long time. Before mentioned what is happening in the Sahel. By 2020, it was obvious there will be about 5 coups d'etats. The conversation that ECOWAS is worried that they are moving away. They sent you a letter in January that they want to withdraw. Okay? Now, when you have an institution like ECOWAS, incapable and unwilling to use the knowledge that is generated on the sub-region, except what comes from the outside, that becomes a problem. Now, if you count the number of institutions, security institutions in the sub-region, we have about 15 different organizations and sub-organizations and security organizations, which we cannot fund. 10 days ago, they met in Abuja, and they said they wanted to build a 5,000 force, costing $2.6 billion. You can't even fund the $100,000 one. Okay, so one begins to ask, what is the basis upon which our leaders make decisions? And to whom should those decisions benefit? Because if we take the way our leaders have allowed the crisis in the Sahel to get out of hand, and the fumbling in deciding to create new institutions, you truly wonder, where are we going? Do we have a grasp and an understanding of the underpinning social and political tensions in this sub-region, and by extension on this continent?
Professor Ajimandua, at the end of the day, then that comes and feed into the narrative. Just over the last, dominating the discussion platforms internationally is about a number of those countries, of course, having experienced a coup d'etat, saying that they are no more interested in the regional bloc, etc. But we also know that there had been a genuine narrative of a certain light or promise of leadership being democratic on the continent. Macky Sall, for example, a typical example, praised by the West to be perhaps the beacon of hope. Of course, Ghana also is always part in the mix. What then is the problem with the current generation of African leaders to be able to serve the needs of their people when they are elected into office?
Well, first of all, I'm always worried when the Western countries begin to pick a country in Africa and say it's a beacon of hope or it's a model democracy like Ghana. I get scared. I have to tell you this.
Why?
Because that is the way for them to capture you. For you to accept their model of governance and their model of democracy. The fact is that, and I keep saying, there is no better system in the world than democracy. But it doesn't mean democracy is the best. You have to understand that. Democracy, the way you practice it, should be adaptive to your own circumstance. And there's no contradiction in that. So if the West begins to tell, oh, you good, you are democratic, it means they are happy that you've accepted their democratic practice, not the ideals. Ideals are universal. I keep saying that. Anyway, so the problem, and Kwasi has hit on so many issues, talking about knowledge generation and its application in our countries. And that goes deeper because that notion goes down to what kind of knowledge are we generating? Meaning, what kind of curriculum are we preparing our young people to become? The reason why most of our young people have become helpless and hopeless, and I'm glad, at least the Kenyan students are showing a completely different understanding of governance. Look, the first time on our continent, young people have forced a potential dictator, Ruto, if you know his history, forced him to concede and withdraw. And going beyond the withdrawal of the bill, to even accept to cut down needless expenditures. That is one of the core issues. Because look, we say we are poor. When Jeffrey Sachs comes to East Africa, or he comes to Ghana, by the way, and he talks about the potential that we have, it's clear. Everybody knows that. In terms of natural endowments, we all know that, both human and other natural things, minerals and other things. The potential is always there. The issue has been the utilization of that potential. How do African leaders use the potential that we have, both human and material? That's the issue. Because if you're a leader and your mindset is still that if a certain mineral is discovered, all you do is to negotiate with foreign exploiters. They should give you 5 or 8 or 10%, and the rest is theirs. You see, the Sahel, I think in Niger, they told the French, you are giving us this. Not even the Traore, Burkina leader made a statement, I think yesterday or 3 days ago in Abuja. The guy has a clear mind of where his country and Africa generally should be. Ask me if we have leaders with that kind of thinking. Kwasi is talking about the ECOWAS and its problems with the 50 or so, 15 institutions. Now they go and meet again, so we want to set up a force, battalion or brigade or whatever. To do, and you don't have a penny. That tells you of their mindset, because I am very sure the French and the Americans are propping them up again with money. We'll give you $1 billion. They will not give you $1 billion to build your roads that are all rotting in our countries. They will not give you a loan or a grant to provide water in such a way that all our people will have good drinking water. But they will give you $1.3 billion to set up an armed force. For whose interest? For whose interest? So what these young people are doing, leaders are doing in the Sahel, frankly, I don't care whether they are in military uniform or not. Their thinking is what I admire. And that's the way African leaders should begin to reset their minds. So if we are going to democracy again, we are going for elections to elect people, it's almost like in the United States, where with all their so-called intelligence and all, they are torn between two, electing a man who is almost demented and one who is good but too old to talk. That's the choice they are facing. And I see that in my own country. Not they're demented or aged, no. But their thinking is not reflecting any seriousness about how our country begins to delimit its overdependence on the international community. That is the issue. How do we mobilize our local resources to create wealth? How do we do that to create wealth? That should be the fundamental question.
Okay, so when we hear the narrative and then also the historical performance of these individuals who become leaders, even from our own country, and then when they come into power, they perform poorly at the helm of governance, what do we attribute it to? That they learned it well while not on the seat, and then when they come onto the seat, they are swayed differently?
Well, that's part of it. But first of all, we don't know the mindset with which they can. Of course, they tell us all the good things, but even what they tell us, if we are smart and knowing what we know now, looking at the Kenyan example, let us begin to hear from them what they're going to do. In this country, we have complained over the several years, including my own little voice, about the need to downsize government, I should say. And I always keep warning people, it doesn't only mean reducing the number of ministers. Because if you look at Kenya, what Ruto is forced to do, it's not just ministerial numbers that he's dealing with. Excessive expenditure of maintaining the office of the president. The recklessness in creating institutions that consume but not produce. The international visits, travels that are completely meaningless. I don't know about our president, but I know countries where presidents, for a little trip to New York, can be followed about 80, 100 people, most of them doing practically nothing, including one who holds his briefcase so that he can put the paper he's going to read on the podium before he reads. We pay for them. What is the use of that? Every international meeting that has no relevance to national development, our leaders will attend, and they attend in full with the whole retinue. You know how much it costs to go and put your president in a 4- or 5-star hotel and the others check into other hotels? You know how much it costs to stay for 1 week? That is why Magufuli in Tanzania, he came to office and said, look, I'm not going to move an inch to anywhere. Even he refused to attend AU meetings because he said, look, this is useless. We'll go and talk and write communiques and drink tea and come back. For the 60 years or so of AU, what in practical terms have you got it? We have not even to build a single highway to connect two countries. You see, so the whole logic of governance in Africa must be reviewed. And I think we need people with that kind of mindset. Okay. And as for the mindset, frankly, I don't know how, but we need a change of mindset before we can tackle these issues.
Okay. So, Professor Enin, then, how do we bring the conversation to bear on a certain style of leadership that will resolve the difficulties we're facing? Is it modeling or retweaking the current so-called democratic dispensations to reflect our cultural nuances, to resolve security issues, economic issues, social issues? Because at the end of the day, they create insecurity on the continent and in the countries.
Well, I think we can start by being honest with ourselves. And I want to begin by focusing on two things. For election 2020, I think 8 people died.
Yes.
Or 9 people.
8. Or 9.
We don't know how many people got hurt, whether some people were raped or sexually molested. Parliament was invaded. That was the tip, and it could have tipped anyway. So when people talk about preventing Kenyan-style demonstrations, I think it's come and gone, and we didn't learn. And when you don't learn lessons, and a friend of mine always says, we are all good history teachers, but we are very bad history students. Until and unless we give closure to those who committed atrocities in the name of elections in 2020, and whoever ordered the soldiers to invade the chambers of parliament on the 6th or 7th of January 2021, that Kenyan moment that Ghana has experienced is gone and we haven't learned. What might then happen as a result of the frustrations arising out of not learning might be much more serious than the Kenyan demonstrations we've seen. That's my first point. Number two relates to our partners clothing us with fine titles and telling us we are doing well. Let me come to the security bit. There is this narrative that the terrorists are coming. They are coming from nowhere. It is when you leave dead citizens unaccounted for, why they died unaccounted for. When your parliament is invaded by people who ought not to have been there, that is what lays the basis for insecurity. But even more disturbingly, Roland, I think as Africans, and I think Bafo has said this, we need to be critical of what our partners tell us. If we use an intersubjective approach, probably you can get your producer to find out how many terrorists have killed people in Ghana in the last 5 years. How many Ghanaians have died through road traffic accidents this week, from last night to now?
Excellent. Good
And
point.
let's flip the conversation. If our European partners had 5 terrorist-related deaths in 5 years, and they had 40 road traffic accidents-related deaths, would they focus on terrorism, or they would focus on creating safer roads for their citizens? And I think as Africans, we need to begin to question the quality of the prescribed solutions to our problems. So to come back to what you've said, leadership is key. But what is the type of leadership that we are looking for? How do those who seek to govern present themselves to us? If I come to the Ghanaian case, there is very little substance in the presentation of those who seek to be leaders to the populace. It's more fluff and noise. And I'm increasingly convinced that the ability to really sit down, disaggregate, present detailed plans, that some of it may go into the manifesto in an abridged version, that we hardly ever do that. So we get one set of stories throughout the campaign period, catchy songs, flashy dancing,
Good slogans.
good sloganeering, a lot of them quite empty, so that when power is then handed over, we now begin the whole process of saying, hang on, this is what we said, how do we do it? Okay? One underlying factor propelling the drive towards leadership is also the use of violence as a currency. And I think in this country, there is no doubt that there's a direct positive correlation between violence as the use of abusive language, threatening language, denigrating language, and getting access to fairly decent political office. So we need a new kind of conversation and a more robust involvement by the populace. There is a cynicism around politics now. There's almost a withdrawal of critical minds from politics, because it's become too violent, too abusive, too disrespectful, in which the content of what we want to do is not what we discuss, but the packaging. And I think until we ask ourselves the critical questions about bringing knowledge and merit back into politics and into public life, I think we are not going to change the situation in which we find ourselves. And were Kenya to happen here, because we've missed our Kenyan moment and we didn't even recognize it.
The sign's still there.
The signs are there. And I think Francis Poku's conversations just about a week ago or so, points very clearly to the disturbing signs that we need to deal with.
Professor Ajimandua, where lies the hope then in churning out the type of leadership that we want? Because something has got to give and something has got to change with what we need as Ghanaians in order to resolve the difficulties that there are. Because if somebody doesn't have access to food, etc., or access to good health or education or employment, suitable employment, that is also as a volatile security issue as maybe terrorists, so-called, even at your borders, right?
Well, first of all, a nation cannot lose hope. I mean, people who think there's no hope, I don't agree. There is always hope, because without hope, then you are going to have inertia. You won't do nothing if you don't have hope. So we have to always keep hope alive, as Jesse Jackson would say. But having said that, I think the way we have structured our politics, if we want to continue to maintain that, then it seems to me is going to be a tough time changing from what we have now to something desirable. In other words, like Kwasi was referring to elections and how the violence and how campaigning for office deals with almost empty slogans and all of that. And that is still what we are practicing. So that even in the face of serious challenges, we are not getting, for me, I'm not getting from any of the candidates any idea of how we change our circumstance. Some are tinkering on the constitution, I'll change this, I'll change that. Look, I think that's why I'm always talking about the constitution, even though some people dismiss it. Oh, it's helped for 30 years, so there's nothing wrong with it. A whole lot of things are wrong. The way we have created executive, or what I should say, imperial executive, depriving people outside the top echelon any access to how to rule themselves. I'm talking about decentralization. Look, democracy starts from the grassroots up. We have created a system that brings democracy from top to the grassroots. When you leave Accra and go out to any other place in this country, what do you see? No activity, no action. People themselves are sitting, idling by or going to the farm. Nothing. They did not even meet to discuss the challenges that they are facing in their localities. Even under colonial government, local councils were more active and productive.
Yep.
Then we have our own independent governments, and they've stifled development because they think they know it all, and therefore they should stay in Accra to determine where a toilet should be placed in my village, where a 3-kilometer rural road should be constructed, and who should do it. They give the contracts in Accra. Accra is not Ghana, and Ghana is not Accra. Ghana is from Wa to Cape 3 Points, from Enchi to wherever. That is Ghana. And it's all because we have structured our politics in such a way that the imperial president sits in Accra with his henchmen, and they determine the money we collect and how we use it. even when the Constitution has said there should be district assembly common fund, that should go to them. The finance minister in Accra can sit on it for 2 years because they decide to use the money on something else, not what the Constitution has directed them. These are all the issues. These are all the issues I'm talking about. So we don't have democracy in terms of being for the people, by the people, as Abraham Lincoln said. But we have a democracy determined by a few elites, political elites and bureaucratic elites who sit in Accra. For me, that is key to resolving the problem, so that districts can become the focus of development. And people at the districts and the communities can begin to discuss their own development. Of course, with the support from their share of the taxes that all of us pay, but not a few people doing that. That for me is the crux. So when we talk about the excessive power of the presidency, it's a major part of the issue, because all this in the president have to sign. So I think if you're looking for a real change, whilst I submit that this constitution has helped, but even in my view, it helps us only to have elections, which Kwesi has described as violence elections, which is true. We have succeeded in using elections to change from one devil to another devil. Because when they come, they do the same kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You see. So for me, it's very important that we get serious revising the constitution and giving power more to the people than to those who we elect. After all, when we elect them and they are making appointments, they don't go by merit. They go by those who supported them, who were loyal to them. So we have a situation without meritocracy, putting, is it square pegs or round pegs in square holes?
Square pegs and round holes.
People cannot, that's right. People don't function. Me, I travel, I go to district. At times I go to some district office and I feel bad for whoever is the DC or MC. They have literally no power to do anything. Look at our cities. Why is it that we have a city council and now our respected government is now leading cleanup? He is now leading the clean. So ask yourself, what is the essence of local governance? That
all right.
Those who are appointed, paid, given vehicles and free houses to keep the city clean, and they cannot, and the traditional ruler has to step in, and it happens almost all over the country. Look, our system of governance is dying. It's becoming irrelevant. It's all money, money, money that they spend.
Yeah, as we wind up the conversation, he makes a point there, and I clearly witnessed as an intern that transition from so-called the PNDC, the NDC, and then, I mean, there was this wave of euphoria and change among people. It looks like not only have we slept on our oars, but we said we were moving from a military style of government to a democracy. And then all these years down the line, we see that even the civilians are doing worse. How do we get the right sort of people into leadership? Because clearly you, Professor Abafo Ajimande, all of you don't want to espouse the narrative you are churning out. You don't want to get into executive position to cause change. You also don't want to have your credibility dented, so to speak. And so we have all of you in the masses or in the population, and you've left others to do the governing.
No, I think the levels of inclusion and willingness by qualified people to engage in politics is if and when politics is driven by shared values, shared norms, and principles. It's always useful when you join a club or a group that you recognize and share what that group or organization stands for. So if you look at we cast our minds back to the anti-Rawlings demonstrations by people in the universities then and farmers and and the gradual shift towards the Fourth Republic. There were different groupings, the Kumipreku demonstrations and all that. And when political parties started, you can even see a shift and a deteriorating one at that from 1992 until now. That political party cultures are not deepening, that they are driven more by fluff, people with very limited experience and exposure and a grounding in what public service means through the political party vehicle. So right now, there's a lot of empty sloganeering. Balfour spoke about decentralization, and if I tag that to your question, then I think what you are asking is a more sort of what is the word I am looking for? A more localized groundswell of political engagement. But it's going to take a Herculean task to do so, because when the Danish government under Mr. Rawlings's rule started to provide the support for local government involvement in governance, part of the idea was not to replicate wholly the Danish system, but to say, look, we've tried a system where a certain percentage of your taxes remain plus government support, so that local people, the local mayor with his cabinet, can make decisions at a certain level. Right now, ask how many Ghanaians know what their local council uses their taxes for. So together with a friend of mine, we've decided to use the right to information bill to challenge our local council to show us what they used our taxes for, what they use for their sitting allowances, for lunch, for petrol, how much they've used to clean gutters, to collect refuse. So yes, Bafo and I cannot continue to sit on the fence and wax. But we can begin at the local level by getting like-minded people to raise critical questions and to engage the local councils. Okay? And I think that the RTI gives us a leeway and a space to do so. But we've got to change the way we conceive of leadership across a very broad spectrum. Of course, political leadership gives the general guidance to the whole country. But as at now, I think the quality of leadership leaves a lot to be desired.
All right. So the last question to you then, Professor Agyemang-Duah, if this is where we're pointing the discussion to, it means that there's no hope within the current structure we're practicing. It also means that the current generation and the next really are not going to have a lot of benefit from the current leadership by way of the political elite and what we're doing. What could be the consequences? How do we avert those?
Very good. In fact, I've said before that my prayer is not for us in Ghana to learn the best way of demonstrating to cause change, as the Kenyans have done, because I don't want any Ghanaian to die fighting for a just cause. So my prayer, therefore, is to have measures that will prevent that from occurring, which is exactly what you are asking. In other words, what do we have to do as a nation to preempt a major social revolution? Not necessarily the military, personally, I have no fear for military coup. What I have a fear for is exactly what happened in Kenya, which could be worse than that. Despite the notion that Ghanaians, we don't like blood, we've been killing people left and right all the time. So, and what for me will preempt that is to change the structure of governance, this winner takes all thing. You see, decentralization will mitigate the winner takes all mentality, that you win power and everything in the country, the state belongs to you. And you decide who gets what and when and where to define politics. You see, that's exactly what is happening. So once there's a government in place, all the opposition has to do is to talk and raise and criticize, and it's not like it's not illegitimate. They have a duty to do that. But the intention seems to be to get you down so we can also take over power, because over the past 32 years almost, we have lived under two parties. And I don't see any qualitative difference any of them has brought to us. That's why I'm so cynical of this duopoly in our politics. And for me, we can ease that by seriously decentralizing, where young people who want to get into politics can begin to cut their teeth at their local level. Let them be elected as district assembly people with more powers than what we have, as DCs, as all kinds of positions that we can think of. And then they can graduate to become the national level leaders. So when you're talking leadership, it seems like we are interested in the one, like what he's saying, leadership is at different levels of our nation, different levels. But because of the way we have structured our constitution and has given political power all to the center, it doesn't allow leadership to emerge from the local level. So after university, every student wants to join a political party and shout and shout and shout. If you win power, with no background, with no, even not a bicycle, you immediately become a deputy minister. You have a car, you have everything, you have a driver, and they pay you. The other day, I saw a video where a Nigerian senator or somebody recounting the allowances. My goodness, it's the same thing with the Kenyans, and it's the same thing here in Ghana. We're spending a chunk of our national revenue to service people who are supposedly there to serve us. We are rather servicing them with our resources through all the entitlements. Look, the entitlement mentality in our politics is another problem. They think they're entitled to everything. Look, when Kenya happens here, like I saw in the video, parliamentarians running for cover, leaving their cars, it will hit them. So I think the political elite should wake up. And all of us, not just the political elite, our chiefs, everybody, all of us have a stake. We got to wake up and agree that we need to restructure the constitution and get power down to the people and avoid the imperial presidency that we have. If we can do that, we'll go a long way in beginning to really see this country picking up.
Well, thank you very much for two of you coming by. And also thank you for joining us as well. Professor Bafo Ajimendria, it's been quite insightful having you. And Professor Enin, also a security consultant, indeed, shapes public opinion not only in Ghana, but also across the continent and beyond. Well, we've had some insightful discussion this morning. Let me just take the time and then read a couple of your messages. Laye Daniel says, political leader decisions are based on themselves and only to benefit their families. I have a number of them also raising issues with the current state of governance in our country, especially 5 months to the election. And McCarthy raises the issue about Ghanaians need to make sure they speak truth to power and question what is wrong, and then also make sure they do what is right while they call on leadership to serve them and not the other way around. Just 5 months to the election, what are your key expectations regarding the security for this election, and what responsibility would you then hold the Electoral Commission to, looking at what transpired in 2020 and before then?
Well, before I start, let me say this. I think there's an Afrobarometer report that shows that the Electoral Commission, the judiciary, and the Ghana Police Service have all lost the people's trust. And that has potentially serious implications for the elections. Now, for the Ghana Police Service, they are the frontline institution for the Election Security Task Force. And I know that this study was done just about 9 months after Dr. Dampare had taken over. But it's key that the signals are sent by the Ghana Police Service that we have this in control, that we have our hotspots, we know who the troublemakers are, and certainly for the judiciary, I think some special courts will be established to deal with election-related violence. The Electoral Commission must also ensure, certainly through the IPAC process, that there is trust, there's transparency around whatever they seek to do. Roland, I am worried about the less than 5 months campaign period.
Why?
Because it would mean, when we talk, earlier on I spoke about this cauldron, where all the tensions are damping. So the abuse, the intimidation, the top speed on our roads driving us all off, the intimidatory tactics, usually we have it over close to 9 months. So within 5 months or less of all these tensions coming to a head, we would need to have the police service backed by the army, ensuring that we have the stability necessary for us to go through this election. But it's going to be a difficult 5 months period ahead, with an economy that is on its knees, and people, of course, seeing the elections as their cocoa season, and therefore being willing and prepared to do whatever they will do to be recognized by the key parties and to get some monetary the benefits.
Well, thank you very much as well. So, and thank you for passing through the studios. I know that it's early morning for you. You had to do some other engagement, but you sacrificed your time. Eric Ametokwame says, I'm wondering why there was no panel discussion on your show this morning. Anything that matter. Usually we'll have a mix of politically active people and all that. So, but thank you for also watching us. A couple of messages as we have them. And this one is coming from Prosper in Tema, who says that I did enjoy the discussion this morning, and it clearly emphasizes that we need to ensure that everybody is well alert. Sometimes I wish that you put the questions rightly and blame the current insecurity and the state of the economy that is causing the insecurity for young people and the entire country, instead of saying everybody is to blame. And so that's what we have this morning. But as it is, we're taking a break. When we come back, we'll have more right here on the show, including sports.